There is a kind of power you carry that cannot be taught because it was never learned. It's remembered. Somewhere deep in your marrow lives a language you never studied, yet you've always known. A rhythm, a frequency, a presence that doesn't scream, doesn't chasate, simply is. This isn't about becoming more feminine. This is about shedding the noise that made you forget you already were. Feminine energy isn't an act, a performance, a script to memorize, it's a blueprint you were born with. But the world made you cover it up with armor, logic, rush, and apology. Carl Jung spoke of the animath feminine image that lives in the unconscious mind of every man. She's not a woman, not exactly. She's an echo, a symbol, a mirror of what he aches for but cannot name. And here's the truth few will admit. When a woman begins to live from her remembered essence, she doesn't just affect his thoughts, she stirs something far deeper. She speaks to the part of him he has long silenced, long buried, not with words, but with energy. And energy doesn't lie. That's why you don't need to explain yourself. You don't need to prove your worth, perform your softness, or audition for love. Your being is the message. Your presence is already whispering into the corners of his subconscious, even when you're not aware of it. There's an intelligence in the feminine that defies reason. It dances beyond logic and lands straight into the body. He may not understand why he's drawn to you, why he remembers your gaze, your silence, your stillness, but he feels it. And that feeling is older than either of you. It's instinctual, archetypal, because you're not just a woman. You're the archetype trying to wake him up, not by telling him who to be but by being who you are. And the more you trust this internal blueprint, the louder your energy speaks. The world may try to mute it, but the subconscious of a man tuned to his soul, he will hear you. Long before he knows why, long before he's ready to admit it. He won't just see you, he'll remember you. And that changes everything. Before you speak, before you smile, before you even enter the room, he already senses you, not with logic, not with eyes, but with something more primal. His nervous system tightens, his chest opens. His thoughts scatter, and he doesn't know why. But you do. It's your energy, your essence, your field. This is what happens when a woman is truly in her feminine blueprint. She is felt. Not like a gust of wind, but like a shift in gravity. Something about the air around her becomes different, slower, deeper, magnetic. And what's most powerful is that it's silent. Feminine energy doesn't arrive with noise. It doesn't shout for attention. It hums, it pulses, it draws. Jung understood this in his study of symbols, and the unconscious show the human psyche responds to meaning that cannot be explained. Your presence becomes a symbol to him, not in a literal sense, but through a deeper recognition, something wordless and ancient. That's why some men pause when you walk by, not because of your looks, but because something in you made them remember something in themselves. You see, attraction isn't always about seeing, it's about sensing. There are women who light up a room before they enter it, not because of appearance, but because of coherence. The way they walk, the way they breathe, the way they don't chase. You don't need to make an entrance when your vibration precedes you. That subtle rhythm, the way you're grounded in your own body, the way you allow silence to speak for you, sends signals, not loud ones, subconscious ones. And that's what reaches him first. He feels your rhythm before he hears your voice. He registers your presence before he even realizes what he's looking for. It's like a whisper in a language he didn't know he understood. He won't be able to name it. He may even try to deny it. But it will pull at him. That is the power of your feminine energy when you're not forcing it, when you're simply living it. You don't have to seduce to be seductive. You don't have to try to be magnetic. You already are. And once you realize that, once you remember that, your presence will say everything your words never could. There's a kind of woman who walks into a room and doesn't need to perform. She doesn't exaggerate her smile, tilt her voice, or contort her essence into something more palatable. She simply is. And that's what makes her unforgettable. Because her energy isn't rehearsed, it's embodied. She doesn't seduce with technique, She seduces with truth, not because she's trying to, but because she's no longer pretending. And that's the difference. Performance says, "Look at me." Embodiment says, "I see me." And when a woman truly sees herself without shame, without apology, every man in the room feels it. Jung taught us that the unconscious is always searching for wholeness, not perfection. And that's why men don't fall for the most polished version of you. They fall for what's real, for the contradiction, for the texture, for the woman who laughs from her belly one moment and goes silent the next, not out of moodiness but presence. She's not reading lines, she's living her own script. There's nothing more dangerous than a woman who has stopped seeking approval. She no longer curves herself to fit inside someone else's fantasy. She lets her energy speak for itself, raw, grounded, honest. And while others may try to compete by being louder, sexier, flashier, she becomes unforgettable simply by being full of her breath, full of her body, full of herself. Not in arrogance, but in alignment. You see, performative femininity is like a mask. It might attract eyes, but never souls. It might generate interest, but never intimacy, because men don't stay for perfection. They stay for what feels real, and embodiment is real. You don't chase validation when you already walk in self-possession. That's why he can't explain why you linger in his mind long after you're gone. It wasn't the dress, it wasn't the perfume, it was the way your spirit didn't need permission to take up space. Authenticity isn't soft, it's seismic. It moves things under the surface. And in a world full of noise and performance, your truth is the loudest frequency of all. Speak it without words. Embody it without effort. That's when everything changes. There's a stillness some women carry that unsettles the world, not because it's cold or empty, but because it's stable, peaceful, unshakable. And, in a world addicted to rush, chaos, and attention-seeking, that kind of calm becomes revolutionary. You've seen it before, the woman who doesn't flinch, doesn't chase, doesn't explain herself unnecessarily. She's not detached, she's just not controlled by urgency. And that's the kind of energy that disarms a man. Because what most don't understand is that feminine stillness isn't weakness, it's a force. It doesn't shout, but it doesn't need to. It speaks in silence, in presence, in poise. And men deep down are drawn to that space, because their subconscious recognizes it as something safe, something real, something they don't have to guard themselves against. In the calm of your energy, he finally exhales. Jung once said that people will do anything to avoid facing their soul. But when he's in the presence of your groundedness, he's invited to meet his own. That's why stillness creates trust. Not because you're passive, but because you're anchored. You don't overreact, you don't manipulate, you hold. And in that holding, he feels his nervous system begin to settle. That's not softness. That's sacred regulation. You don't even realize the effect you're having when your gaze doesn't demand, when your body doesn't clench, when your energy isn't scattered. In your stillness, he senses something ancient. A kind of knowing, a kind of safety, a kind of truth. But here's the key, you didn't create that energy to attract him. You created it to protect yourself. And it just so happens that this is what he's starving for in a world of noise. Chaotic energy might entertain him, but it doesn't keep him. It reminds him of instability, unpredictability, the kind of fire that burns but doesn't warm. But your calm, your regulated feminine essence, that's the fire that glows. That's the peace that pulls him in without force. Because when you're rooted, he doesn't feel the need to control. He feels the desire to surrender. So no, you don't need to be louder, brighter, more impressive. You only need to be true, because the woman who's found peace within herself doesn't chase anything. Everything of value comes to her. You've been told to speak clearly, to speak up, to make your voice heard. But no one ever told you the truth. Your voice was never just sound. It was vibration, a frequency, a carrier of emotion that travels deeper than logic, bypassing thought and going straight into the nervous system. It's not just what you say, it's how you say it. Because when a woman speaks from her essence, even silence becomes a sentence. Carl Jung taught that the unconscious understands symbols more than explanations, and you, woman, are a living symbol. Every sigh, every pause, every breath before a word becomes a story his subconscious hears. Your tone becomes a message. Your pace becomes a rhythm his body registers before his mind does. That's why some women say everything right and still leave no impression. And others? They speak softly and leave a man completely undone. The power of the feminine voice doesn't live in volume, it lives in vibration, in intention, in presence. There are words that sound like lullabies not because they're sweet, but because they're real. Words that land in his chest and stay there, not because they convince, but because they remind. When you speak from your truth measured, unrushed, unwavering, you're not asking to be heard. You're commanding resonance. But the greatest magic often lies in what is not said, in the space between your words, in the pauses you allow. Because stillness in conversation speaks of confidence. You don't need to fill every silence. You let the energy breathe, and that unsettles men who are used to noise but captivates the ones who are ready to feel. Your voice carries an imprint. It reveals your self-regard, your boundaries, your clarity. Even in casual conversation, you are either mirroring your power or giving it away. He hears it, even if he doesn't understand it. That softness in your yes, the calm certainty in your no, the warm withdrawal in your silence, it all tells a story. One his subconscious never forgets. So stop trying to convince, persuade, or impress. Speak less, mean more. Let your voice drop into your body and echo from truth. Because once you realize that your voice is a frequency, you'll stop speaking to ear sand, start speaking to souls. He doesn't fear your beauty as much as he fears your eyes, because it's through your gaze that he realizes you see him. Not just his charm, not just the persona he wears for the world, you see beneath it, behind it, through it. And for a man who's spent years hiding behind his ego, that's terrifying, yet magnetic. The feminine gaze is not about seduction, it's about soul-level recognition. When you look at him not with judgment, not with longing, but with knowing, it awakens something primal. Jung would call it the shadow, the part of him he's disowned, denied, buried. Your gaze doesn't shame it, it invites it. You don't flinch at his darkness, you acknowledge it. And that, more than anything, makes him feel naked. It's not about staring, it's about presence. Your eyes don't wander. They rest, they soften, they land with weight. You look at him not to analyze but to understand. You don't need to speak. You don't even need to smile. Because in your gaze, he senses something few women offer reception. Not approval, not control. Just a deep, grounded witnessing. That's why eye contact with an embodied woman is almost unbearable for some men. Because they know she's not fooled by the mask. She sees the contradiction, the fear, the longing, the ache to be chosen, and the terror of being seen. You don't expose him, you invite him to expose himself, and that invitation is sacred, rare, disorienting. There's something holy about the moment a woman sees a man and doesn't try to fix him. She simply lets him be. She sees his shadow and doesn't run. She sees his potential and doesn't demand. And it's in that silent allowance that something begins to thaw inside him. Don't underestimate the power of your eyes. They speak languages most lips have never learned. They hold the archetype of the mystic, the mother, the mirror. You don't need to explain that you see him. You just need to meet his gaze and stay there. Not to dominate, but to invite. Not to expose, but to illuminate. He may not be able to say what happened, but he'll leave remembering how your eyes made him feel, like someone had finally seen all of him and didn't look away. Some women play at being mysterious, calculating pauses, withholding affection, pretending disinterest. But that's not mystery. That's manipulation dressed in detachment. True mystery isn't about playing hard to get, it's about being whole. It's about a woman so fully rooted in her own soul that no one can immediately define her. And that undefined space, that sacred unknown, is what draws him in. Jung said that the psyche is drawn toward the unknown because it represents growth. And when a man meets a woman who doesn't fit into his familiar categories, he feels that pull. Not because she's distant, but because she's deep. She doesn't reveal everything all at once, not out of fear, not out of control, but out of reverence. Because she understands that intimacy is earned, not performed. A mysterious woman doesn't hide, she simply doesn't overshare. Her energy invites, but never begs. Her story is layered, but not locked. She knows that the parts of her that matter most can't be explained in bullet points. They must be felt. She doesn't make you chase her, she makes you slow down enough to meet her at her depth. And that's what so many miss. Depth is not about being difficult, it's about being dimensional. She's not performing mystery, she is mystery because she's lived through her own darkness. She's not afraid to feel, not afraid to be seen. But she's not in a rush to be consumed, and that unsettles men who are used to instant gratification yet fascinates those who are ready to explore. The woman of depth isn't unreadable, she's just not flat. And that's why men who are tired of surface-level attraction find her unforgettable. Because when you speak to him without saying much, when you smile without giving everything away, when you're fully there but not fully unfolded, you awaken something wild in him. A desire not just for you, but for the parts of himself he hasn't yet accessed. So no, don't play games, don't pretend to be mysterious. Instead, become whole. Because the more of yourself you reclaim, the more magnetic your presence becomes. Not because you're hiding, but because you've stopped performing and started being. Before your voice reaches him, your body already has. Before your words land, your posture, your rhythm, your presence have already spoken. And whether he realizes it or not, his subconscious is listening, closely, constantly. Because your body is a transmitter and his nervous system is the receiver. And what it picks up isn't logic. It's language. Not verbal, energetic. Every movement you make, how you walk, how you stand, how you pause, tells a story of how you feel about yourself. Whether you're home in your body or trying to escape it, whether you're open or armored, available or avoidant, the body doesn't lie. And the feminine body, when aligned, speaks a language that is far more powerful than anything rehearsed. You don't have to sway your hips with intention or exaggerate your gestures to be noticed. It's not about seduction, it's about coherence. A woman whose body moves from inner alignment is felt. She isn't trying to get attention, she simply moves in a way that says, I'm here, I'm whole, I don't need to be fixed. And that calm confidence, that unspoken sovereignty, it calms him too. Jung reminded us that symbols bypass the mind and strike the soul. And your body is symbolic. It holds the archetypes within you: maiden, mother, lover, mystic. How you sit, how you breathe, how you carry your own weight tells him who he's dealing with, even if he can't put it into words. That's why sensuality, real sensuality, has nothing to do with sex. It has everything to do with safety, aliveness, presence. And here's the paradox. The more grounded you are in your own sensual energy, not flaunting it, not suppressing it, the more it vibrates through your gestures, your glance, your gait. You become unforgettable without even trying, because his body is registering something ancient, a woman who has nothing to prove and everything to offer just by being in her body. So, don't underestimate your walk. Don't overlook your breath. These are not small things. These are signals. And the man tuned to his own emotional intelligence will hear them long before he even knows your name. Because feminine energy doesn't need to be loud to be heard. It only needs to be true. There's something undeniably magnetic about a woman who knows how to say not with anger, not with apology, but with clarity. A woman whose energy says, I know what I allow, I know what I don't. That, more than seduction, more than charm, pulls a man in. Because boundaries are not walls, they are invitations. Not everyone is meant to pass through them, but the ones who are know they're entering sacred ground. Carl Jung taught that value is projected onto what is protected. And the feminine, when it doesn't guard itself, gets devalued not because it lacks worth, but because it leaks energy. A woman without boundaries becomes a mirror of his desire instead of the keeper of her own. But the woman who holds her line, who honors her time, her body, her emotional space, that woman radiates worth without saying a word. Here's what most don't realize. No often carries more allure than yes, because yes can be performative. Yes can be habitual, but a conscious no, that reveals discernment. That says, I am not here to be consumed, I am here to be met. And that kind of presence immediately shifts the dynamic. It tells him she's not impressed by attention, she's only moved by truth. Men are drawn to women who are not fully accessible, no, because they want to chase, but because they instinctively understand that value requires presence, not possession. It's the paradox of allure. The more whole you are without him, the more he wants to be invited in. And not every man will rise to that challenge. But the ones who are ready, they won't run from your boundaries. They'll be humbled by them. Your boundary is not rejection, it's revelation. It reveals what you value. It teaches him how to approach you not as a taker but as a partner. So don't soften your no to be liked. Don't stretch your yes to avoid discomfort. Your energy is not here for mass consumption. It is sacred, and the moment you start treating it that way, the world does too. There's a kind of woman who doesn't speak the loudest, doesn't move the most, doesn't fill the room with drama, yet when she walks in, everything shifts. Why? Because she's present, not distracted, not deluded, not posing. Her energy is anchored, and it grounds the space without trying. That's the difference between performance and presence. One seeks to be seen, the other makes you feel. We live in a world that rewards noise, but feminine energy is not loud, it's felt. It doesn't seek applause, it resonates. And when a woman drops into her body, when she breathes with intention, when her eyes soften but don't scatter, she commands the moment, not with effort, with essence. Carl Jung said that what is unconscious in us will be projected outward, and men who encounter a truly present woman often find themselves adjusting, standing taller, speaking slower, becoming more attuned. Not because she asked them to, but because her presence mirrors back the parts of them they've forgotten. That's the impact of grounded feminine energy. It calls them forward without a single word. Performance is exhausting. It drains both the giver and the receiver, but presence restores. It nourishes, because it tells the truth. I'm here, I'm not performing, I'm not chasing. I'm simply being. And in a world full of filters, pretenses, and personas, that kind of realness is more captivating than anything else. When a woman is present, her attention becomes a gift. It doesn't come cheaply. It isn't thrown at anyone who looks her way. And that's why it's felt so deeply. She's not seeking to entertain, she's inviting alignment. And any man who enters that field knows immediately is different. You don't need to earn attention when your presence already commands it. You don't need to prove your worth when your stillness already speaks it. The woman who can be with herself fully, honestly, without distractionists, the woman every man remembers, even if he can't explain why. Because presence isn't a strategy, it's a state of being. And once you find it, you'll never need performance again. There's a moment when a man sees you not just with his eyes, but with something much older. He pauses, he tilts his head, he can't quite explain it, but something in you feels familiar. Not in the surface way, not in the "you remind me of someone" way, but in a way that strikes his subconscious like a memory he never lived, and yet has always longed for. Carl Jung called her the animath inner feminine imprint that lives in every man's psyche. She is the soft, intuitive, radiant force that balances his logic, his drive, his detachment. And she takes many forms. Sometimes she arrives as the mother, the nurturer, the comfort, the home. Sometimes as the lover, the fire, the beauty, the surrender. Other times she is the mystic, the one who sees beyond masks, or the warrior, the protector of her soul. And sometimes she is all of them in one, whole, undeniable. When you begin to live from your essence instead of expectation, you activate something in him that is both mysterious and ancient. He may have never met a woman like you, but part of him has always been waiting for you. Not because you complete him, but because you awaken him. You bring him face to face with the possibility of wholeness. He doesn't fall for your looks, though he may be drawn to them. He falls for your frequency, for the way your presence reminds him of something he buried to survive, of the softness he forgot how to trust, of the connection he feared he'd never deserve. That's why he lingers. That's why he watches. That's why you echo inside him long after you've gone. This is not about being everything for a man. It's about being fully yourself and letting that fullness resonate with the places inside him he hasn't dared to name. When you embody the archetypal feminine not as a role, but as a return to truth, he doesn't just see you. He remembers you, even if he's never met you. And in that memory, something begins to stir. Something that could change him if he's ready. What many don't understand is that the feminine doesn't only attract, she reflects. She becomes a mirror, not just to what a man desires, but to who he really is beneath the armor. And mirrors are not always comfortable, especially not the clear ones, especially not the ones that don't lie. When your energy is embodied, when your presence is honest, when your gaze doesn't flinch, sees himself, and sometimes, for the first time, he sees the gap between who he is and who he thought he was. He feels the distance between what he offers and what he longs to offer, and that's where the path splits. Because some men, when faced with their own shadow, will run, and others will awaken. Carl Jung said that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious, and that's what your feminine energy does. It doesn't rescue, it reveals. It holds up a mirror to his potential, his projections, his pain. You don't have to analyze him. You don't have to correct him. You only have to be. And your being, your truth, will show him everything. Some will call you too much, too deep, too intense. But that's only because the reflection startled them, because they weren't ready to see the parts of themselves you brought to the surface. And that's not your fault. That's their choice. Emotional maturity is the filter. Not every man can hold what you mirror back. But the ones who can, they will rise. Not for you, but because of what you showed them. You won't have to beg for growth, for clarity, for presence. They'll step into it. Because when a man meets a woman who doesn't perform, who doesn't chase, who simply has two choices: numb himself deeper or become more awake. So don't dim your light to make the reflection softer. Don't shrink to fit his comfort zone. The right man will not fear your mirror. He will honor it, because he knows what it means. It means he's finally been seen and finally has the chance to see himself. There's a difference between a woman who waits to be chosen and a woman who chooses, a woman who needs to be filled and a woman who overflows. Emotional sovereignty is when your happiness no longer hinges on his response, his attention, or his presence. You're not indifferent, you're intentional. You feel deeply, but you don't collapse. You desire connection, but you're not defined by it. That is irresistible. Men are subconsciously drawn to the energy of wholeness, not the loud kind, not the showy, performative independence, but the kind of calm clarity that says, I am already complete. Your presence is welcomed, but not required. This energy doesn't come from coldness. It comes from self-trust, from the years you spent learning how to hold yourself, from the quiet rebellion of choosing joy even when love didn't arrive on cue. Carl Jung wrote that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires us to integrate, not depend. And when a woman reaches that place in herself, she emits a signal that the masculine feels instantly, not just in his mind. In his body, she doesn't chase, she doesn't compete, she rests. And that restfulness becomes a gravitational field. It's your detachment from the outcome that draws him closer. Not because you're unavailable, but because you're free. He senses you won't be controlled. He knows he can't buy your loyalty with charm or empty words. Because you're not a question he needs to answer. You are a world he longs to enter, and worlds don't beg, they invite. You are not an option. You are not a backup plan. You are not a placeholder until he figures himself out. You are the kind of woman who doesn't need a seat at the table because she is the fire around which everything gathers. And once you fully embody that truth, you stop asking who's coming. You start deciding who's worthy to stay. Emotional sovereignty isn't loneliness. It's power, quiet, fierce, unshakable. And in a world where most people are trying to get something, your energy will stand out as a rare and holy offering. A woman who chooses without needing to be chosen. He says you're intense, that there's something about you he can't explain. One minute he's drawn in, the next he pulls away. And you wonder if you did something wrong when in truth you did something powerful. You touched a part of him he was trying to avoid. Not by attacking it, simply by being who you are. Your depth disrupts his comfort. Your truth brushes against the edge of his carefully constructed identity. And suddenly, without even meaning to, you've triggered his shadow, the parts of himself he buried, denied, or never learned to love. But here's what Jung taught us. The shadow is not evil. It's simply unconscious. And when your presence stirs it, he has two choices: fight it or face it. That's why your energy might disturb him, not because it's too much, but because it's too real. In a world of surface-level affection, you offer depth. In a culture of distraction, you offer presence. And that presence, steady, soft, undemanding, acts like a mirror he didn't ask for, but desperately needs. It's tempting to shrink when you notice his resistance, to dilute your truth, to dim your radiance, to apologize for being a catalyst. But the feminine was never meant to be neutral. She is not here to make him feel safe in his illusions. She is here to invite him into transformation. Your energy is not just attraction, it's initiation. You are not just a potential partner, you are a portal, and the man who is ready for evolution will sense that. He may tremble, but he won't run. Because he knows what you represent, the chance to become something more than he's ever been. But make no mistake, this kind of invitation is sacred. And it's not for everyone. Some will try to diminish you, distort you, make you doubt your power. That is not your burden to carry. Because you didn't trigger his wounds, you simply illuminated what was already there. The right man won't fear your mirror. He'll thank you for it. Because he'll understand that what feels like pressure is actually possibility. That you didn't come to break him, you came to wake him. And if he chooses to rise, it won't be because you begged. It will be because your truth reminded him of his own. There comes a moment, quiet, unannounced, when something inside you shifts. You stop explaining, you stop proving, you stop reaching for hands that were never meant to hold you. And in that stillness you realize you no longer need to be understood, because your energy has become its own language. You walk into a room, and the air moves differently. Not because you asked it to, because you are different. You're no longer translating your soul into palatable pieces. You're no longer watering down your truth to be digestible. You've outgrown the need for consensus, for comfort, for applause. You've returned to yourself, and now you radiate. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And you've paid that price, with every disappointment, every silence. Every time you bent yourself into something smaller just to be loved in a language that was never yours. But you've learned now, love that asks you to fragment isn't love, it's fear. Now, you are fluent in your own essence. You speak through stillness, through boundaries, through the gaze that no longer seeks permission. And yes, some will misunderstand you. Some will call you distant, cold, unreachable. Let them. Because you finally know you were never meant to be fully grasped. You were meant to be felt. The woman who no longer needs to be understood is not detached. She's rooted. She feels everything, but she is not undone by emotion. She listens, but she does not absorb what isn't hers. She loves, but she does not abandon herself in the process. She is not performing. She is living raw, whole, untamed. There is a sacred power in no longer needing validation, because from that place you speak truth without hesitation. You walk away without resentment. You stay only where your soul is honored, not out of pride, but out of alignment. And suddenly, life begins to respond differently, not because the world changed, but because you did. You've become the kind of woman who doesn't demand to be chosen. She chooses. Who doesn't fight to be seen. She sees herself, and in doing so, she becomes the mirror, the magnet, the movement. Not for everyone, but for the ones who are finally ready to meet her at the depth she never again intends to abandon. Because now, you don't need to be understood. You are already whole. This story was brutal, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.